This is part 2 of the series of videos on the racial origins of Indians and explains the racial origins of various nations after Noah's flood. Hello, friends. This is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. After the flood, all of humanity has descended from Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Though Noah, his wife, his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were all racially white, Ham and Japheth had married interracially. Ham had married the Negro Neama, the world famous daughter of Lamech, whereas Japheth had married an Oriental looking wife, a descendant of Cain. That is the origin of the different races after the flood. Before the flood, interracial marriages were a leading cause of worldwide violence. Also, the entire world had one language. To prevent global violence after the flood, God planned to separate different descendants of Noah by race. Children of the same patriarch would then grow into large tribes, which would then grow into nations. Knowing this would most likely minimize the fighting within nations. Before the flood, Lamech and his family ruled the entire world. God's colonization plan was also designed to prevent that from happening after the flood. The flood had also created continents, oceans, and very high mountain ranges which would act as natural barriers to conquerors with plans to rule the entire world. About 75 years after the flood, when the world population was between 300 to 400 people, God gave Noah his colonization plan to have his descendants spread out to different areas of the earth. About 80 years after the flood, Noah took a 10-year-long journey by land and boat with his three sons to view different lands to which they could then send out colonies. While Noah and his sons were on their journey, Neama was free to tell the whole human family the history of her family before the flood from her perspective. Noah had given God's perspective on history before the flood and explained why the anti God deeds of Cain and Lamech's descendants had led God to drown that entire world. But now, without Noah's influence, the 4 to 500 individuals in the entire human family were able to learn a different version of that history from the point of view of Neama, the Athena or Minerva of the myths, and her family before the flood, who had ruled the world and had been worshipped as gods. She painted a picture of her family as being heroes who had brought civilization to the world through their material progress with the discovery of metals and alloys by her brother Tubal-Cain, the Vulcan of the myths, advancements in music through her half-brother Jubal, the Apollo of the myths, and her own discovery of the art of weaving and introduction of textiles as Athena or Minerva of the myths. In Noah's absence, Neama and Ham's nearly 80-year-old black son Cush, who was already married to a black wife and had children by her, seduced a white descendant of Japheth, the strikingly beautiful, approximately 20-year-old Semiramis. The result of this affair was the birth of Nimrod, who was born dark. When Noah and his sons returned from their journey, Noah refused to allow the relationship between Cush and Semiramis to continue, as Cush was already married, and as God's purpose for the colonization plan was to prevent races from mixing, since that had been the leading cause of violence before the flood. Cush was not allowed to marry Semiramis. Nimrod grew up into a very strong young man, probably a tall giant. Just as that time, wild animals' population had grown much faster than human population because animals multiply faster than humans. Wild beasts such as lions, tigers, leopards, bears, and wolves had begun to attack human beings and threaten the survival of the human race. Nimrod stepped up and led expeditions to hunt wild animals that drove them away from human habitations. At that time, still concentrated in the area of Armenia, where Noah and his family had settled after emerging from the ark. Thus, Nimrod, while still a very young man, barely in his 20s, established a reputation for emancipating man from fear of wild animals. He began to be viewed as a savior of mankind by some. That kind of recognition and fame can go to a young man's head, and it certainly did in the case of Nimrod, who later deified himself. After further preparation for about a couple of decades, Noah began to send out colonies. But rebellion against God's colonization plan had been brewing for some time. After having been enthralled by the pre flood stories of the exploits of Neama's family, some were developing plans to emulate these pre flood heroes and rule the entire human family, which at that time had grown to about 2,000 strong. Cush, Nimrod, and Semiramis led the rebellion against God's colonization plan. A white descendant of Noah, Asher, the son of Shem, the original ancestor of the ancient Assyrians and the modern Romans, was also among the rebels. They did not want to be separated from the rest of the human family for their own reasons. Cush and Nimrod did not want to be racially separated to be free to marry anyone of any race, and also because they had plans to rule the entire world. Asher did not want to be separated because he had his own plans to rule all of humanity. A slight majority of the human family followed them in their rebellion against Noah and God's plan. These people were brazenly rebelling against God as their ancestor Cain and his descendant Lamech and his family had done before the flood. When Cush and Nimrod were asked to go to their allotted area, they refused. They, along with Asher and others, instead went to the land of Shinar, which is in modern Iraq, a fertile land built up by the silt deposits from the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, to build their own civilization. The fertile land would easily produce food for them in great abundance. Since they were rebelling against the God of Noah, Cush, Nimrod, Semiramis, and Asher set up their own god to worship in opposition to the true Creator God. Noah had taught the entire human family that God was the creator, sustainer, and provider of food for all creatures, including humans. But Cush, Nimrod, Asher, and the rebels with them hated the true God and his laws and restrictions. Like their ancestors Cain and Lamech, they did not want to worship him. Then they remembered another God in the Garden of Eden who had enlightened the first human beings, Adam and Eve, and told them that they could develop their own knowledge, their own civilization, and do what was in their own best interest. The rebels reasoned that what the God of Noah was telling them was not in their best interest. On the other hand, the serpent in the Garden of Eden had certainly spiritually enlightened humanity about a better way, meaning their own way of life based on their own wisdom. And he had not commanded them to do anything or imposed any restrictions on them as the God of Noah had done. The serpent had also guided the material advancements in Lamech's family, of which Cush's mother Neama had been a part. The rebels believed they could easily build a far advanced civilization with the guidance of the serpent or Satan the devil than Noah could build. That would attract most of humanity to them. Then Cush and Nimrod told the people that they got their physical abundance not from the God of Noah, but from the sun god. Since fire was regarded as an earthly representation of the sun, fire was incorporated into the worship system. Thus the rebels created a god of their own, the sun fire serpent god. The sun became a favorite object of worship because of the light and heat it gives. This being the case, the two enlighteners became associated together. For just as the serpent was considered to be the spiritual enlightener of the world, so also was the sun the enlightener of the physical world. That is how one of the commonest symbols of the sun or sun god became a disk with a serpent around it. This is stated in Bunson's Hieroglyphics, Volume 1, page 497. Cush and Nimrod thus gave the people a new god to worship, the sun fire serpent god, and a new religion. They themselves became the high priests of this god of their own creation. After moving to the land of Shinar, the rebels started building a city called Kish, which could also be called Cush, obviously named after Cush, and built dwellings for themselves. They also began constructing a tower, a sanctuary, which was to be the great symbol of their religion and worship system and would serve as a temple. They would also build the magnificent city Babel around it, which would be the symbol of their human government. When the tower had reached an impressive height and construction on the city of Babel was proceeding well, Cush and Nimrod were inaugurated as co rulers by the people. They already had plans to rule the entire human population, then only about 2,500 to 3,000 strong. Cush, being the older by about 80 years and wiser of the two, supervised the building projects at Babel, whereas Nimrod went out into the field to see what opportunities could be found to expand the empire. In such trips, Nimrod must have come into contact with people working with Noah and Shem. Because the world population at that time was so tiny, Nimrod hoped to give the people loyal to Noah a vision of the better civilization they were building than Noah and lure them into that camp. That would provide the additional manpower for the building projects. Then eventually they would bring all of humanity under their control, even if it finally involved imprisoning or executing Noah and Shem. The Creator God was watching the progress on the project and the schemes of the rebels. At some point in time, God determined to intervene in human affairs and alter the course of history. God's intervention on the activities of the rebels took place about the 131st year after the flood, when God had allowed them nearly 2 decades to pursue their plans. The intervention and the reasons why are mentioned in the Bible in Genesis 11 verses 1 to 9. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they, that is the rebels, journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, or meaning, come on, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. Slime basically means bitumen. And they said, Come on, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach into heaven. And let us make a name for ourselves, meaning become world famous like their ancestor Lamech, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth, which also indicates that it was the colonization plan they were rebelling against. And continuing, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. Now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Come on, let us. The plural here shows that this was a conversation between God the Father and the Word, who later became Jesus Christ. So they said, Come on, let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So God came down to see the city and the tower that this part of humanity was building, and summed up the situation in verse 6. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have one language. God saw that the people were united in their goals, and the goal of Cush and Nimrod was to make the whole world into one world in every possible way. The same goal that Lamech had achieved before the flood. They wanted one world with one world government under their control, one religion, meaning their religion, their pagan religion, one culture, one race, that means mixing all the races together and creating one race, and then one society. Cush had married Semiramis and started mixing the races. Among the rebels, other interracial marriages had taken place. Some of Elam's descendants and Japheth's descendants had already married interracially with Ham's descendants in the years since the rebellion, though Asher prevented this from happening to most of his descendants. One language meant that there were no communication barriers whatsoever between them, which made the attainment of their goals easier. So, next, notice what God the Father told the Word. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. So, God assessed the situation and concluded that what Cush and Nimrod had imagined to do was not definitely within their grasp, and they had imagined ruling the entire world and making a name for themselves, meaning becoming world famous, as stated in Genesis 11, verse 4. So they were in a position to achieve precisely what Cush's grandfather Lamech had achieved before the flood. The world population at that time was only around 4,700 to 5,000. So the best time to control all of humanity was when the population was still small. That is what Lamech had done before the flood. He had sought to gain control of the world when the population was relatively small. So Cush and Nimrod also wanted to prevent humanity from spreading out over the earth by thwarting God's colonization plan being implemented through Noah. Humanity would be that much harder to control if spread out over the earth, which was precisely God's purpose. The earlier they could accomplish this, the better it would be for their empire. It seems at this time the rebels were planning to attack Noah's group and bring the entire world population under their control. Cush and Nimrod's kingdom and plans had reached threatening proportions. After taking control of the entire population of the earth, they and Asher would have destroyed the truth and the knowledge of God's way of life. To do so, they would have probably executed Noah and Shem. A true world dictatorship would have become a reality within a century and a half after the flood. That is why God decided to intervene. Instead of destroying the rebels, he decided to divide them by confusing their language and force them to follow his plan to spread out over the earth that they had refused to do voluntarily under Noah's authority. The account in verse 8 of Genesis 11 also says that the rebels left off building the city. So something more than just confusion of language took place. God has always left ruins of the destruction that he causes to serve as a witness to humanity in the future. We see the evidence of Satan's rebellion in the craters on all planets and the debris in our solar system. Cain City has also been unearthed by archaeologists under the ruins of Jericho and can be seen even today. Apparently, God has also left enough remains of this rebellious Tower of Babel project to serve as a witness to humanity. Right on the outskirts of ancient Babylon, on a very high place, there is a huge mound known as the Beers Nimrod, or meaning the Tower of Nimrod. On top of this massive mound is a small tower which is probably a later addition. The small tower is also constructed of brick and bitumen. Observers have noted something special about this immense mound. The remains there have not only crumbled down, they have also been burnt. Thus, it seems, God set the tower ablaze in a lightning strike. The bitumen or asphalt used to hold the bricks together was waterproof, but it was not fireproof. It struck fear among the people who stopped building the city and scattered away. The city has been aptly named Babel, meaning confusion, in memory of the confusion of language of mankind that took place at that time. Confusion of language simply means that different peoples received different languages and could not understand each other after that because they were speaking a language that were different from the languages of others. Originally, God, by a divine miracle, had put the ability in man to understand and speak one's language in the minds of Adam and Eve. That same language had been handed down the generations till the Tower of Babel generation. Certainly, by another miracle, God put the ability to speak and understand different languages and different branches of the human family. God gave different branches of Noah's family a different languages so that they would not understand the speech of a different race. As a result, they were forced to separate from each other by race as God had originally planned. That is how different nations and races originated after the flood. That division by race and language is indicated in the Bible in Genesis 10, verses 2 to 5 show how different nations sprang from the different sons of Japheth, the son of Noah, according to their languages. It states, the sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastlands people of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, every one according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. Similarly, about the nations that sprang from Ham, the son of Noah, Genesis 10, verses 6 to 8 and 13 to 18 and 20 elaborate. The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabtika. And the sons of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. Mizraim begat Ludem, Anamim, Lehabim, Caphtuhem, Pathrusim, and Casluhem, from whom came the Philistines and Caphtorim. Canaan begot Sidon his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Arkite, and the Sinite, the Arvadite, the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. These were the sons of Ham according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands and in their nations. Then Genesis 10 verses 21 to 29 and 31 to 32 state, and children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, that means the Hebrews, the brother of Japheth the elder. The sons of Shem were Elam, Asher, father of the Assyrians, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad begot Selah, and Selah begot Eber, and unto Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. That means this is when the confusion of languages took place, leading to division of humanity. Then continuing, and his brother's name was Joktan. And Joktan begat Almodad, Sheleph, and Hazar Mavith, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. These were the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages, to their lands, in their lands, according to their nations. These were the families of the sons of Noah according to their generations in their nations, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. The entire earth was divided among these sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. To understand who the various descendants of each of these sons of Noah are, one must remember that Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were all white racially. Shem had married a white woman, Ham had married the Negro Naamah, and Japheth had married an Oriental looking wife. But since Shem and Japheth were racially white, all of Shem's descendants would be born white, whereas some of Japheth's descendants would be born white and some would be born Oriental looking. Some would also be born mixed looking. In the same way, some of Ham's children would be born Negro black with curly hair, some would be born black or shades in between, but with straight black hair, whereas others would be born swarthy white. There has also been racial mixing because of interracial marriages forced upon peoples by Cush and Nimrod in their rebellion against God and subsequently through the centuries. But the broad racial divisions of the earth are that descendants of Shem settled in Europe with subsequent migrations to North America, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. They are descended from Arphaxad, the son of Shem. Persians are the descendants of Elam, the son of Shem, but they are slightly darker than European whites because Elam apparently married a swarthy white daughter of Ham and Naamah. Asher apparently married a white daughter of Japheth, and his descendants are the Germans. The Syrians are the descendants of Aram, the son of Shem. Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, but they have quite heavily mixed with dark peoples. In addition, Ishmael's mother was an Egyptian and he married an Egyptian. Turks are the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, but he married an Arab woman and two Canaanite women. Canaan was the son of Ham. Hence, Turks are generally darker looking than other Europeans. Jacob or Israel is the ancestor of the British and American peoples, the Jews and the Northwest Europeans. Jews have generally mixed with the peoples of the nations in which they have lived. Bible historians know that the white Slavic and Russian peoples are descendants of Japheth, whereas all Oriental peoples are also descendants of Japheth. Some of Japheth's descendants who had joined Cush and Nimrod's rebellion were forced to racially mix with Cush's black descendants. That is why some Chinese, Tibetans, Nepalese, Malaysians, Indonesians, and Filipinos are dark in color. Most people in Latin America are also descendants of Japheth, though mixed with other races. Egypt is known as the land of Ham because that is where Mizraim, the son of Ham, settled. Cush's other name, Mizr, derives from Mizraim. Mizraim was a swarthy white individual. His descendants are the Copts in Egypt. The lightest in color among the Egyptians, Cush means black as Ethiopia also means black. So Cush is Ethiopia because that is where Cush settled with his descendants after he was forced out of Babylon. Canaan, the son of Ham, settled in what is today the Holy Land. Phut, the son of Ham, settled in what is Libya today. Africa is where the other descendants of Ham settled and spread to other areas or were taken there by others. However, not all of Ham's descendants settled in Syria and settled in Africa and Canaan. Those who settled in Africa had the curly hair of the Africans, but some of Ham's descendants were born dark-skinned but with straight hair because Ham himself was white. This trait also continued in the next generation. Thus, it seems that two kinds of children were born to Cush, the son of Ham. One kind had curly hair and settled in Ethiopia. Another branch of his family had straight hair and migrated in an easterly direction from Babylon, where the confusion of languages took place. The reason they were forced to separate from each other was that they received different languages at the time of the destruction of the Tower of Babel. That is the clue to the racial origins of most Indians. In part 3, I will discuss how Nimrod, Semiramis, Asher, and the pagans corrupted Noah's religion. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini to watch and get information on the latest videos. Thank you very much.